I'm Steve Bosque, the opinion editor of the Sun Sentinel, and with me this morning are several colleagues. Martin Dykman and Randy Schultz are on the editorial board. And joining us from the news side is Anthony Mann, the Sun Sentinel's political reporter, who's covering this race. Anthony does not play any role whatsoever in editorial endorsements. That's exclusively the editorial side. So thanks again for joining us. We have questionnaires from some of you and don't have questionnaires from some of you. And so I'm going to try to fill in some of the blanks, and I'm going to dive right in and start with you, Joe Budd, and ask you just to give us a very, very brief synopsis of why you're in this race.
Well, as you know, I ran in 2009, 2010, and then I was elected in 2016 to be the Palm Beach County Republican State Committeeman, defeating a popular three-term incumbent, won re-election in 2020 with 73% of the vote. And I thought that would be my last race. I wasn't interested in running for politics ever again. But when I saw the Cook political report come out, making this district a D5 after the governor vetoed the legislature's map, and the NRCC had targeted this seat for a pickup, I just felt compelled to run because of the underperformance of the 2020 nominee. This is a great opportunity for a Republican to flip this seat, and I felt I was best suited to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Chess, I believe you said in your Sun Sentinel candidate questionnaire that one of the reasons you're running is because of the anti-Israel policies of Congressman Ted Deutsch. Can you elaborate on that?
That was just one of many. I was
Sure.
so upset being an older American, and please refer to me as either Dr. Chess or Steve. I worked really hard to become a physician. In any event, in answer to your question, I was so upset with the general Democrat Party, which I'd been a member of for many years. 6 years ago, I couldn't take it anymore and decided I would be a Republican because they more aligned with my beliefs and aspirations for this country. I've continued to do that. The only reason I'm running is to and for the United States of America. That's it. I have no aspirations of notoriety or celebrity. As a matter of fact, I was retired. I retired when I was 55. I treated a lot of patients here, and I have an empathy for the people who are working people trying to make a go of it in this inflationary time.
Okay, thanks for the reminder about your title. Are you listed on the ballot as Dr. Stephen Chess?
No, I didn't want to influence anyone on that basis, but in what I call general public, I think I should be awarded the title that I've worked for so many years, and for the patients that have seen me, the 16,000 Broward residents that we've treated here at my office.
Okay.
But Steve is fine.
Okay, Steve.
Mr. Chess is my father.
Okay. Okay. I go by Steve too, so we got that in common.
Thank you.
Let me ask you this. Did Joe Biden win the election fair and square in 2020?
I have no idea. No one else does either. We believe that the process was flawed in many different areas, and I too believe it was flawed. I watched Pennsylvania and Michigan, watched the Supreme Court in the state of Michigan object to what had taken place, and she was ridiculed and berated because she said we needed to follow the law, and the law in Pennsylvania was no write-ins unless the legislature changed it. That happened in a number of states, and when you don't follow the law, you have these types of controversies. It makes no difference to me whether he won or not. He is currently the president, and it's time we moved on and elected a group of people that were not based on gender or equality or anything like that. We need to have people in Congress and in our government that are based on merit, and the people that we have running the show right now are not those people.
Okay. The same question to you, Christy McLaughlin. The question is whether you think Joe Biden legitimately won the election 2 years ago.
Well, Dr. Chess is right in saying that no one knows, because the fact-finding missions that we went on in 2020 were blocked in every way through procedural law in the courts. But what I can tell you from personal experience is I was one of the volunteers in Nevada collecting evidence of voter fraud. I spoke to whistleblowers. I took on affidavits and I wrote them and I sent them to Rick Grinnell's team for President Trump at the time. Voter fraud is real. It is a real issue. I've witnessed it. And I have a very good friend, Dr. Linda Lee Tarver, who is an elections expert who testified in Michigan, proving the high irregularities that established that the 2020 election not only was flawed, but very probably fraudulent. So the issue is we still don't know as a fact because we weren't able to due to procedural blockings. But with that said, I'm a big proponent of federal voter ID law to ensure that our federal elections are secure.
Why is it that you talk about procedural blockings? Why is it that, and correct me if I'm wrong, each and every lawsuit that was filed in either a state or federal court by Trump's legal people was dismissed or rejected? Everyone.
Due to procedural blockings. So here's the thing about law, and it's very interesting, and I could give a couple more examples. We'll probably get into it, particularly cases regarding the Department of Education. But in Supreme Court cases, they often do not rule on the merits whatsoever. So the facts presented trying to establish that there is evidence of voter fraud wasn't really considered at all. And what was considered is the procedural process in which they could establish, whether they met the threshold for dismissal. But when they were trying to reach those cases, they had to establish the minimal amount of evidence we could collect because we needed the court cases to subpoena evidence. And that's why it was a procedural blocking and we weren't able to discover more.
Okay. I'm going to get to you in just a minute, Martin, but I don't want to overlook Jim Pruden here. Jim, I want to ask you also to tell us briefly about, the reason for your candidacy, but also address this issue of the legitimacy of Joe Biden's presidency. Turn your mic on, Jim.
How about now? Have you got me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Over time, it certainly became increasingly concerned about the growing movement to transform our country's political, social, and economic structure. And, that's being advanced under this banner of, they call it democratic socialism or the great reset of capitalism. That is a very, very concerning area. It calls for complete transformation of our country and deviates away from what we've had over the past couple hundred years. So, I've watched this over the years, as well as the degradation of our country's manufacturing prowess, the increased foreign control and influence over America's businesses, and, the reliance that we have for critical resources and strategic items from foreign countries. All these compromise the security of the United States. Now, as for me, I'm running. I disagree with my my good friend, Mr. Budd, about underperformance. He had referenced me. I did have 166,000, more than 166,000 votes to his 78,000 votes. I performed at twice the rate. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this. The best candidate is going to be, one that possesses the qualifications, has a platform that's consistent with their own voters' ideology and their priorities, as well as their electability. And, there's no doubt, there's no dispute that I have the greatest, academic, professional experience of any of the candidates. I have, as I mentioned earlier, showed a significant performance in the 2020 election. And I'm also, as far as electability goes, on this election, I'm the only candidate out of the group that was put on the ballot by the voters. They put me on by petition. Everybody else had to pay the $10,400 fee. So, you take that in conjunction with the fact that I've got ability to execute on this campaign. I'm the best financed. I finished the last quarter with over $180,000 in free cash and no debt in the campaign account. And we're continuing to execute on our plan. So, that's why we're doing it. It's for the sake of the country. And the only reason why I'm running is that I'm hands down the best quality candidate and best qualified.
Okay. Go ahead, Martin Dyckman. Turn your mic on.
Have any of you ever served as a voting official checking voters in at the precincts?
No, not for me.
I have, and from my observation, I'd like you to address this. There are so many cross-checks, including signed forms, that it seems to me impossible for anybody to cast ballots in another person's name without it being discovered at some point. It just doesn't happen. I've never encountered a voter who said, wait a minute, you show me as already having voted, I haven't. So what do you have beyond suspicion, any of you, to the fact that there was any significant voter fraud in the 2020 election? Because the Justice Department clearly said there was not. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Pick somebody you want to direct that to.
Yeah, it's always better to do that, Martin.
Yeah, well, Miss McLaughlin can answer that one because she's got her hand raised.
Certainly. So I don't know when's the last time you volunteered to do that. First of all, thank you for that service. That is a patriotic and great stewardship that you did. But the 2020 election was very different. First of all, we had mail-in ballots, and we also have affidavits of people testifying saying that they witnessed people signing for other voters because they couldn't come in due to COVID. There is eyewitness testimony of that. Now, you can take that on its face or not, but the real issue is we never got to bring that to court. And so therefore, we never got to see the veracity of those statements. So there is some evidence of voter fraud. There truly is. And despite the fact that there's multiple checks, those checks did not exist on the scale that it used to in 2020. In fact, Democrats have been pushing to open the elections for accessibility, when the reality is it's not about accessibility. It's about making it easier for people to vote on behalf of other people. We know for a fact that dead people did vote. There is evidence of that as well. And so when it comes to preventing fraudulent elections, we really have to do a deep cleansing of the processes that exist. And I know it's a state issue. I'm a huge proponent that election laws should be a state issue, but at least on the federal level, a federal voter ID could solve that.
I'm just going to point out right here that the Associated Press just moved a story over the weekend surveying all the election officials across the country and finding no significant evidence of fraud in mail-in ballots. What's your response to that?
Me again?
You brought it up. Anybody else can answer too.
Again, they say that there's no significant scale, but they're not looking at the evidence that we provide. I mean, how many times have we seen on the news? My friend Linda Lee Tarver went and testified to eyewitness testimony. She provided the substantial evidence that showed that voter fraud does exist on the grand scale. And then the response is, no, it doesn't. So you could take it on its face or not, but until you actually bring it to court and you have the veracity tested when you swear with your right hand on the Bible, then you can't really know. We never got to get to that level.
Yeah.
Anybody else can pick up on that if you want. Do you believe that mail-in balloting is inherently fraudulent?
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I don't know if it's inherently fraudulent, but many of my Democrat presidents did believe it was fraudulent and recommended against it. It was a bipartisan study they did on mail-in ballots, wherein they said that mail-in ballots leads to fraud. Jimmy Carter, and I don't know who the other party was, I don't remember or recall at this time. What really troubles me is when we have lawless government. And what do I mean by that? I mean by when I sat and watched the goings on in Michigan and also in Pennsylvania, where they did not, I think it was Georgia too, you'll have to check, did not follow their constitutions and change the voting write-in ballot issue by fiat, not having any governmental authority to do that. And my whole premise is we need to follow the law, and we need to have law and order in our country. And when you don't follow the law, you get the kind of anarchy we're seeing all over the nation.
Joe Budd, you had your hand raised. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I'm not litigating 2020. I mean, that's done. Biden's president. But I want to go back to answer Martin's question. I just think it's a little naive to think that we have a perfect voting system. You know, you asked the question, has anybody been a poll worker? I've been a poll watcher. And as a poll watcher, I saw problems at the polls in West Boca where there's somebody was checking in voters. It gets all the way to the end where they're supposed to press a button that says this voter has been issued their ballot. But this particular person wasn't trained properly, and she was issuing a ballot without pressing that last button step on the computer. So that person was voting, leaving, and that person was not thoroughly checked in, meaning that they could have come back the next day and voted again because it didn't show them as voted. I alerted the supervisor of that particular polling place. She says, oh, yes, that is a problem. It happened 6 times before I had the opportunity to actually noticed it and alerted the polling captain. So we don't have a perfect system, but you know, I'm not going to litigate 2020 either. Joe Biden's our president, and we're facing the consequences of that election.
Go ahead, Jim Pruden. Go ahead, Jim.
Sure. And like everybody says, you know, we're way downstream here, and it's way past litigating 2020 election. But what we do need to do is learn from that election and make the appropriate adjustments. You know, here in the state of Florida, we've been very active in passed legislation to try and close a lot of these loopholes and fence in the problems that we've seen. You know, there was substantial video evidence showing that you know, the problem with mail-in ballots is that you had ballot harvesting that was involved. And that is where individuals will either procure or take ballots from the mailbox or actually buy ballots and turn them around, fill them in, and drop them in what was unattended drop boxes at the time during that election. You know, substantial video evidence showing people, you know, dropping just, you know, 10, 20, 30 ballots into a drop box as an individual and then going down the street and doing it again. So those issues, you know, a lot of that has been cured here in the state of Florida, and you know, something that, you know, certainly I'd like to see the other states cure as well, and do like we have done and outlaw ballot harvesting, so that you can address this issue with stuffing, you know, ballot boxes. And ballot boxes should not be unattended.
I've heard Governor Ron DeSantis say on at least 30 occasions that Florida has outlawed ballot harvesting. In light of that, why do you still say it's a problem?
Well, that's correct. We, as I said, you know, last summer we did address that, but it's not been addressed by every state. There's still some states that haven't definitively outlawed ballot harvesting, and until you outlaw ballot harvesting, you're going to have problems with mail-in ballots.
Okay, I'm going to switch subjects quite a bit and switch to Joe Budd first. Joe, the question is abortion and a woman's right to choose. Do you support the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in the Dobbs case regarding reproductive rights?
Yeah, absolutely supported it. Now it's a state issue, no longer a federal issue.
How about you, Steve Chess?
Would you repeat the question, please? And
Yeah,
one other question before you do. Has this paper ever endorsed a Republican candidate in the past?
Yes. Yeah, the Sun Sentinel has endorsed a lot of Republican candidates. I would say over the arc of history, we've probably endorsed a lot more Democrats, but we have endorsed them. But
go ahead. What's the question?
Yeah, my question was it appropriate and right for the United States Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade, and why?
They didn't overturn Wade versus Roe or vice versa. What they did is they followed the law. And I'm a law and order candidate. And what they did exactly was they did what should have been done. It is not an enumerated power of the federal government. And Justice Thomas was the lead attorney, I'll call him Supreme Court Justice, and he did the right thing. And my feeling about it is nothing changed. Each state should be in a position to determine what happens relative to abortion, but abortion should not be being used as a form of birth control pill. As a physician, I cherish life. And once we have a viable fetus in this state of Florida, which I live in, we agree that it's at the heartbeat, 15 weeks. I'm sure there are other states who will not agree with that and will agree that it's earlier or later. That's not my issue. I live in Florida. I'm representing the people in Florida. Consequently, I'm going with the law that presently exists in Florida. But for people to tell people that the Supreme Court took away the rights of women is a misnomer. It's not telling the truth. They didn't take away anything. They just handed it back to the states to make a determination of how each state wanted to deal with the abortion issue. Remember, abortion should be rare. It should almost never happen. But there are what I call exceptions, and I deal with them on my website. Anybody wants to go to Chess for Congress, they can see it. I hope that answered your question.
All right, thanks very much. I'm going to recognize my colleague Martin Dyckman. Go ahead. Turn your mic on, Martin.
I'd like to hear each of you speak to this question. Assuming there's proposals for the Congress to pass a national law protecting abortion, there are also proposals from the other side to have Congress prohibit abortion nationally, to restrict travel or do whatever. So I'd like to each of you say a simple yes or no. Do you favor Congress enacting a ban on abortion?
No. I told you my feelings on abortion, and that should hold true. The state should make that decision.
Go ahead, Christy.
I'm going to be the contrarian here, and maybe it's because I'm a woman and I feel a little bit more secure in answering this. I think yes. Overturning, and to answer the original question, overturning Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs case was a step in the right direction. I'm in favor of it, but I don't think it solved the issue entirely. Now, I agree. I'm a huge proponent of states' rights, but I'm also a huge proponent of the rights of the people. Now, what happens with cases of abortion, we have a balancing test of people's rights. We have the issue of privacy, but we have the issue of life. Now, in the Constitution, the right to life is explicitly stated, but there is ambiguity of when life begins. And that is the job of the Supreme Court, to resolve that ambiguity. They are the interpreters of the Constitution. And I think there should be a Supreme Court case that interprets life as beginning at conception. Now, I understand the very limited exceptions that will apply when it comes to abortions, but I also firmly take offense. I think it's malicious and abusive of people to use the case of a young girl getting raped or a woman's life being at risk to justify legalizing abortion in the totality, because the reality is the totality of abortions, 99.7% of abortions are simply due to a woman's choice. It was a consenting adult who did an adult thing, knowing the risk, and now doesn't want to deal with the consequence. I, as a woman, am responsible. I know the consequence, and I, as an adult woman, know to take on the responsibility of pregnancy if I chose to do the adult thing of having intercourse. The reality is abortion is not birth control, and we should not be relying on these tragic cases of little girls being raped or women having their life at risk. Those are the limited exceptions in which abortion might be considered, but that is not an excuse to justify abortion in the totality.
Okay. Same question to you, Joe Budd.
Mike,
We can't hear you, Joe. Joe, we can't hear you. Joe, we can't hear you. Joe, your mic is off.
I'm not going to answer a speculative question. The opposite is actually true right now. Congress is looking at putting through a bill to ban abortions, not to approve abortions. And I mean, it's now a state issue. Why do we have to make it a federal issue again?
Okay. Jim Pruden?
No, I agree with the court and their ruling and their rationale for the ruling. Clearly, this is an issue that belongs to the state. At such time as there is a determination, in science that when life begins, certainly I favor on a state-to-state basis the heartbeat bill. That's appropriate at this moment. But as Christy had mentioned about there are certain exceptions. Those exceptions are not dealt with at Supreme Court level. That should be dealt with at the state level, where it currently resides now with the current ruling on Roe v. Wade.
Okay. Randy, Martin?
May I just make one more comment? I'm sorry.
You got 30 seconds.
Thank you. Yeah, it'll be quick. The issue with allowing states to be the ones controlling it is we have California and New York that want to allow abortions up to 9 months, up to birth, essentially. And that is way past the gestational period in which a child is viable. And I think leaving it to the states can also be dangerous.
So just a quick follow-up on that. To the extent that you do not think this should be decided on a state-by-state basis, you're disagreeing with the U.S. Supreme Court decision, correct?
No, not necessarily. I think it is a step in the right direction. And I think we do need to limit what can be legislated regarding abortion. But I do think there needs to be some consideration. And I'm not saying it needs to be the end result, but I think it does need to be considered whether the Supreme Court should interpret when life begins.
Okay. Randy.
This is one right now for Jim, but I'll ask a variation of it to everybody. You mentioned your concern about offshore, basically the offshore supply chain, I believe, and how it relates to national security. If you were in Congress now, would you vote for the China competitiveness bill that has passed the Senate and is being negotiated now in the House?
Well, let me talk about the problem with it, so it's clear what my position is. You know, China is taken on a lot of the manufacturing supply of critical resources in the United States. It not only critical at a consumer level here, but also on a national security basis, meaning there are critical resources needed in our military that they supply. You know, China supplies right now, they're manufacture approximately 97% of the antibiotics for the United States. If we get into a rub with China, they can virtually shut down our healthcare system. And so, you know, that's a basis that there's a lot of industries that they have control of, that they have influence on, not only manufacturing over in China, but here domestically. You know, they have either ownership and or control of over 2,400 significant businesses and have tremendous reach within our American industry, as well as our political system as a consequence of that. So, you know, my direction would be to reverse that and provide tax incentives, business incentives, regulatory incentives in order to re-domesticate the supply chain of critical resources, materials back to the United States or under United States control. And at the very least, that it would be taken out of the realm of non-NATO nations having control of our critical resources.
Activate your mic there, Randy.
Sorry, to the specific question, would you vote for that? Because it does address a part of what you're saying.
Well, the bill, like a lot of bills that you have up in Congress, have a great name and they address a portion of a particular issue.
Okay, can you just say if you'd vote for it? Because
and the answer is because it has other provisions in there I don't agree with, then the answer would be no.
So even though it addressed part of it, you'd vote against it?
Well, no, because I don't want to advance other issues that are not part of that bill. If you know, it goes back to single issue legislation. You know, I favor single issue legislation as opposed to ganging a lot of different matters in one piece of legislation. And that's been the nemesis of folks in the political spectrum for years, because they're faced with taking positions on bills that they, you know, typically they should because of the stated subject matter or the stated intent, but only to turn around and find, you know, problems with the content. And so when people ask me about supporting a bill or concept on a blank check basis, I always reject any kind of blank check endorsement of anything. It all comes down to the content of the bill.
Okay, and this is going to be, I'll get back to you, but this I'll circle and start with everybody else. Maybe we'll begin with Steve on this one. Is there anything that the Congress has done, this current Congress under President Biden has done that you agree with?
Can you come back to me? I can't think of one offhand, and I need to dwell on that a moment.
Okay. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I'm hard pressed to think of something too. I mean, things are going so poorly in the United States, 9.1% inflation, $5 gasoline, elections have consequences. So I don't know. Even his trip to Saudi Arabia and Israel were bad. I mean, when he excludes in Israel diplomats from going to the old Jerusalem, that wasn't good. That's not inclusive. So I can't think of anything at this point.
Christy?
When the Congress refused to vote in favor of this federal abortion law. That's the one good thing I could think of.
Okay. Jim, got any ideas now?
On what?
Yeah, is there anything that the Congress
I
is
think
under?
Biden had done anything. I I tell you what, he's coming up wrong on every single instance. You know, his domestic plan, economic plan, international plan, security plan. You know, they've gone completely in the wrong directions. And
So you would have voted. You would have voted against the American Rescue Plan.
Yes.
Yes, is that a yes?
Yes.
And
yes.
that being the case, should Florida have rejected the money, roughly 11 or 12 billion dollars, directly to the state that Governor DeSantis has used?
Why? So another state can waste it? No, I'd take it here.
Oh, so it's okay if Florida wastes it.
Well, if that's what you want to say, but we got the best governor in the whole United States, so I don't think it's being wasted here. Our economy's proven that out.
Well, one reason that, for example, teachers could get all the bonuses they got was American Rescue Plan money.
That's correct, but that doesn't mean we would have voted for it.
Okay, what about the money that's going to the state? How about the infrastructure bill? Would you have voted for the infrastructure bill, all of you?
I was always in favor of an infrastructure bill going all the way back for the last 6 years.
So would you have voted for it, Joe?
Yes, absolutely, I would have. An infrastructure bill is important.
Okay, so that's one good thing this Congress has done then, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course,
How about you, Christy?
all kinds of pork in it, but it's certainly infrastructure was needed.
Christy, would you have voted for the infrastructure bill?
I would have voted against it. It had too much pork. Jim touched on it a little bit. The single issue legislation, it's called the single subject rule, and the state of Florida does implement that, and it's been successful for a very long time. And it's something that I have actually already written the legislation for, and it's prepared to be proposed in the first 60 days if I am elected to Congress. It is something that the federal government should have been implementing all along. Whenever there is legislation, it has to pertain to one issue. That way you don't have people who have to vote against an infrastructure bill simply because there's pork in it and because there's extra spending. So I would have voted against it because of all the absurd extra spending. But the reality is, yes, I agree with Joe Budd. We did need an infrastructure bill. And the previous question, the state of Florida should not be punished because of failed legislation and additional pork. If there is going to be that spending, we as candidates for Congress all have a duty to advocate for Florida first and foremost. So if that money is going to be spent, we have to advocate for that money going to Florida.
Did the money that Governor DeSantis and the Republicans in the legislature have used from that amount to pork?
I'm sorry?
Did the money from that bill that Florida used amount to pork?
Well, it's not necessarily pork. The issue is when you have additional spending, particularly like infrastructure bills, where you have spending abroad in other countries, that's the pork we're talking about. The pork that isn't actually funding the states. The federal government really, we're supposed to be supporting the states and states' rights. The funding should go to individual states so the states can, legislate and do their job. And that's what these federal legislations should do.
Jim, would you have voted for the infrastructure bill?
Not as written. I agree we needed an infrastructure bill, but as Christy said, the amount of pork that was built into that. When I looked at
my hand's not coming up.
I'm getting to you, Steve. Don't worry.
I'm sorry, I didn't know.
When I looked at it, it looked to me like we had maybe 8, 9, at most 10% of the cost of that really going to infrastructure. And why should the American people pay a 90% premium on something that we desperately need? So no, as it was written, I would not have voted for it.
Steve?
Yes, you asked me early on, and I think the question was what the Biden administration has
Right.
done.
Well,
But
I said Congress, Steve.
Okay, well, I I think you know that Congress is being run by the Democrat Party. So what Congress is doing is really what the Democratic Party wants done. And even though there are resistance in the Republican Party, they don't hold the majority. So consequently, it is the Biden administration's Congress. And they have done one thing that I think is very important. They've shown the country what an inept group of people can do in a very short time to the viability of our economy and everything related to it. They have destroyed the things that Trump had hit. And I'm not talking about Trump, by the way. I'm talking about his administration. I don't have any allegiance to any one person in our government. President Trump did what he thought was right, and I appreciated his agenda. I think it was healthy for American public, and I applaud that. Now, getting back to what they've done, they've shown us what we can do if we implement liberal policies and we destroy the infrastructure of America by taking away fossil fuels before the time is right for that to be done. And because of that, people like myself have come to the forefront and are running for office. I had no intention of doing this. I just didn't want my country being destroyed economically. And one of the biggest problems we have is deficit spending and fiat currency. I don't want to bore you all with that right now, but I'm sure you'll get to it in this conversation. But that's what he did. He helped people realize and see what runaway inflation looks like that is suffered all over the world, and to come to the forefront for us to look at what we want to do with our country in the future. Thank you for this time.
And Steve, just one follow-up. If inflation is strictly the result of Biden policies, why is inflation as high or higher in so many other Western industrialized nations?
First of all, I don't know if that to be true. All I worry about is the American public and people. I don't worry about everyone else. I know this, that the dollar is the basis for the currency worldwide. And consequently, when we get a cough, other countries get pneumonia. Consequently, I need to have our legislator and our government have sound fiscal policies. I do not agree with the printing of money and getting into debt and the constant, what would you call it, purchasing things that this country doesn't need. I'm talking about its citizens, not the government, and spending money foolishly. We need to go back to the basics in this country. I foresee either a default of our currency or a very deep recession bordering on a depression if we don't change things. You cannot spend money that you don't have. If you had a child who was at college and he had a credit card and you paid it off the first time and you paid it off the second time, there has to come a time where you stop paying it off. And I think we're at that crossroads.
The dollar, by the way, has been rising around the world. Connection to currencies, and inflation in Great Britain right now is about 9.1%, roughly the same as here.
I understand that. These are all mastications. They're not real. The real problem is here in America, and we need to fix it. And my fiscal policy is to fix it. And I think all of the Republican people who are thinking recognize we can't destroy working people, and we're doing it by causing massive inflation where people can't afford to buy food and groceries and pay for the fuel bill. I don't understand why you don't see that, regardless of what Britain is doing.
I see it, sir. The question that we're debating is the cause, and
cause is runaway inflation by fiat currency, a government that does not back up its currency by any type of what I call basket of goods, or in the past it had been gold. We have to have some rein in on the Federal Reserve printing money that we don't have, and we have to stop borrowing money from China and all of the other countries to allow us to prosper in what I call a false economy.
Okay.
Steve Chess, wasn't it a Republican president, Richard Nixon, who got us off the gold standard?
I don't choose parties. As you know, I was a Democrat. I don't give a darn if he was a independent. It makes no difference to me. It was the wrong thing to do.
Okay, fair enough. I want to ask Joe Budd a question, if I can, please, on a different topic. I'm just I'm going to read something from a mail piece, a brochure from one of the Democrats in this race, and that's a man named Jared Moskowitz. He's going around District 23 asking people to vote for him because he's been such a proponent of stronger gun safety laws, including, quote, raising the minimum age to purchase a firearm to 21. Joe, do you agree with that decision?
No, I was opposed to that decision. I'm opposed to any decision that takes rights away from a law-abiding citizen because you have some mentally insane person who abuses the law. We have 400 million guns in America, all right? People who aren't supposed to have one or get one, they'll find a way. They do things illegally. That's the part of the problem. So I'm opposed to any law that takes constitutional rights away from a law-abiding citizen who is mentally sane.
Christy, how do you feel about the same thing? Should somebody under the age of 21 be allowed to buy assault weapons?
Absolutely. In fact, my little sister, a law-abiding citizen, is under the age of 21. And thanks to some Republicans who voted in favor of raising the minimum age to 21 in the state of Florida, not you, Joe, I know you didn't do that, but there were some Republicans that did. My little sister can't have a concealed carry and cannot defend herself in public if it comes to that. Now, thank God it has never come to that, but it is important to have a firearm to be able to protect yourself, self-defense, and also in the latest Supreme Court case regarding gun rights, the Supreme Court justices recognized that it is important to have a right to bear arms in the case of a tyrannical government. It is our right. It wasn't the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 10th Amendment. It was the Second Amendment. For a reason, our founding fathers considered it so important for our right to bear arms to be the second issue brought up in the United States Constitution.
Okay, Steve Chess.
Two things I want to recognize. I want you to recognize that I'm a veteran and I've lived here in Florida in my Broward County area for 72 years. I have gone from the point where everyone had guns in their cars, drove around, and there was no problem. It has only become a problem of late. And I believe the major problem that we have is that we have no longer instituted what I consider the very important aspects of our country. We took civics out of the classroom so people don't know how our government works. And we took the Bible away from the people. And we divided our nation by what I call silly lines, whether it be color, whether it be race, whether it be amount of wealth, and attacked each other as opposed to recognizing we're all Americans, one nation, one anthem, one country, one people. And we need to get back to that. So again, I go right back to the founding fathers and say, no, I don't want to change anything that they regulated in the Constitution. There is no reason to change the age. What we need to do is change the hearts and minds of the people that we call our neighbors. And if we did that, we'd have a better country. When you see news organizations, and I'm going to point the finger at everyone in the news organization, extolling are telling people that we can stop this, I think they're doing a disservice. What we should be doing is not publicizing it, and we should be shaming the families that created these beasts that do this kind of thing. This is not the American way. This is not how we act as people here in Broward County. Thank you.
Jim Pruden.
Yes, thank you. It's clear that banning or confiscating firearms makes no material difference, but no one has stepped forward to demonstrate that if you take away firearms, that you're going to stop an individual who intends to commit murder or even mass murder. And I point to people all the time that, if you need a really good example of that, on September 11, 2001, we had the greatest mass murder in the history of this country, and not a single shot was fired. We lost 3,000 American citizens to mass murder, and a gun was not involved. So when you have individuals that intend to commit murder, they're going to commit murder. And I also point out that statistically, you never hear the flip side of the numbers. You may have approximately 60,000 gun deaths a year. A lot of those are actually as a consequence of suicide. But what you don't routinely hear is you have about 500,000 defenseless uses of with firearms that has resulted in substantial savings of life. And so there is a flip side to that argument. And really, what is the problem? We all know, we've been around long enough that 40 years ago, this was completely unheard of. It was unthought of, that what we're seeing of late. We have an illness in our culture, and our government needs to step up and start pressing accountability for violent crimes. We need to enforce the existing laws, and we need to go and point the finger back on the assailants as opposed to individuals who are innocent victims. Good example of that is this last week with the gentleman, the clerk working in New York. He came in, an individual came in, assaulted him, he defended himself, and who gets arrested and charged with murder but the clerk for defending himself from a violent attack.
Okay.
And that cultural shift of protecting violent criminals and imposing sanctions on law-abiding citizens who merely defend themselves, that's got to change. And until the day comes when we change that cultural shift, we are going to continue to have this problem, whether we have guns or we don't have guns.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to recognize the Sun Sentinel political reporter, Anthony Mann, for questions.
Thanks, Steve. I wanted to double check both with Joe Budd, and I realize you said you didn't want to relitigate 2020, and also with Jim Pruden. I don't think I heard a direct answer from each of you to Steve's original question about whether you think President Biden was the legitimate winner of the 2020 election.
I can't, if somebody else can go first, I can't take the question right now. I'm on a call trying to get a press release out.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll pick that up. And, I agree with, I think Christy had answered this before, and that is that, the Republican or the President Biden is the president of the United States. Whether we think it's legitimate or not legitimate, we may never know, because frankly, the investigations are still continuing. The real problem is you have 40% of the American population thinks that the election was unfair. You have 60% of the Florida population who thinks the election was unfair. You have deviations in the administration of that election that was done by the election officials and was not sanctioned by the legislatures. You have proof of ballot box stuffing. You have issues that a reasonable person would say that there's a problem here that warrants a further investigation.
Okay, so, sorry, the question was, what do you believe?
Well, what I believe is we may never know whether he's a legitimate president or not. Is he the president? Yes, he's the president. He's accepted as the president. Was the election fair? We may never know, because unless we have a full investigation thoroughly without obstruction from these procedural obstructions in the court system, then we will never know.
Right. So, Joe, do you think he is the legitimate elected president of the United States?
Yes, he became the legitimately elected president of the United States. We've been through this before, Anthony Mann. We had a conversation before. I believe it happened because of the proliferation of absentee ballots, and this was the least secure election we may have had in my lifetime.
You've all touched on abortion earlier in the conversation, but I would like to know if any of you have an objection to the 10-year-old rape victim who then had to go to Indiana having an abortion and terminating the pregnancy that resulted from the rape. I'd like to go alphabetically, starting with Joe Budd.
I personally oppose abortion in all instances. However, I'm not going to take my own personal biblical viewpoint and have to cause someone else to follow my views on that particular issue of rape and incest. I'm sensitive to that issue.
Alphabetically, Steve Chess.
Yes. Two issues here. One, I think it was sensationalized by the press. Once again, I'm pointing the finger at the press. I was told originally that it never happened. Then I was told it did happen. I'm going on the premise that it happened. And a 10-year-old girl was raped by an illegal alien who shouldn't have been here, other than the fact that we have open borders and people are coming across the borders without any justification or any credentials relative to who they are. We need to close the borders, and people who come to America should come legally. Again, it goes back to my premise and why I'm running, and that is law and order.
Do you have an objection to her
Should she been given, please let me finish. Have been given the opportunity with her family and her physician, and as you know, I'm the only physician running. Okay, that would have been my admonition. I would have asked that the physician and the family make that decision, and she should be allowed to do whatever that family and physician believe, and child, by the way, and believe should happen. It should not be a government edict either way, in my opinion.
Christy McLaughlin?
So can you clarify the question? Are you asking personally or on a legislative level?
Personally, what do you believe? Do you have a problem,
Okay.
objection to her?
Well, personally, I think that an unborn child shouldn't be punished for tragic circumstances. Certainly not. But the issue is, and this is where it comes back to the states. Now, when it comes to these very, very tragic situations where a young child is born, that is exactly the exceptions that should be coming up when it comes to the abortion debate. But again, I must remind you that these tragic exceptions should not be the focal point of this debate, because it's far less than 1% of the circumstances. It's really just an excuse and a distraction to bring the debate away from the reality of the majority of abortions, which is just a consenting adult who is using it as a form of birth control. And if I may really quick add on to one thing that we were discussing just previously, I think we can all agree that Joe Biden is the sworn in president, but we don't necessarily know if he's the elected president.
And so just to make sure I understand, you feel it if she decided and her family decided to have the abortion, that's okay?
Well, I would understand absolutely on a personal level, because it's such a tragic circumstance. But of course, I also would mourn the unborn child. The unborn child didn't do anything wrong. It's an innocent. So if we're talking about personally, I'm absolutely pro-life and giving that child a chance. But I understand that it's a child who was raped, and it is something that her body is going to go through. So I understand where an abortion comes into play. I understand.
Jim Pruden?
Well, again, for me personally, I believe in, no abortions. However, I think Joe Budd had mentioned earlier, I recognize that there are certain exceptions, and it's not, up to me to impose, that on somebody else. For example, a 12-year-old girl who has been raped, to force her to go to term will be so catastrophic for her, emotionally and physically. It would be reckless, I think, to not entertain exceptions for these individuals. And that being said, that when you have exception cases like that, we're not talking about letting these individuals go to full term or near full term before they have an abortion. This is something that should be remedied on an immediate basis, before you even reach the threshold of the heartbeat rule. So, very, very limited exceptions. I would not impose this on individuals, but me personally, I'm against abortion.
Okay, Tony Mann, should we move on, or you want to?
We've taken a lot of time, so I'm good.
Okay, I want to ask each of the candidates, and I'll just to vary the pace here, we'll go in reverse alphabetical order. So it'll be Jim Pruden, Christy, Steve Chess, and Joe Budd. As you know, this is a 2-county district. Parts of the district are in Broward County, parts are in Palm Beach County. You're expected to be an ambassador and a leader for all of your constituents in both counties. I'd like each of you to cite me just one issue, one community problem, a community need, something that hasn't gotten enough attention that is different in one county than it is in the other. This is not a cookie cutter place. I mean, Broward and Palm Beach County are alike in some ways, and they're very profoundly different in other ways. So it can be either county, but tell us something that's a bigger problem in one county than the other, Jim Pruden.
Well, I believe that, certainly the most notable problem that we see down in Broward County is opposed to Palm Beach. Now, Palm Beach has made some noise about it. However, the real perceived infraction, if you will, has been down in Broward County as it relates to critical race theory. Critical race theory is problematic. It proposes or espouses to be, teachings for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the real truth of the matter is that it's based upon, some theories, and it's based solely upon a child's race at birth. And, you have the parents had objected to that. And it's well known that the Justice Department had come down on law-abiding parents because they were objecting to critical race theory training down in Broward County and fundamentally treated like terrorists. And that's a real problem down in Broward County. Certainly there's some issues with education up in Palm Beach, but Broward is certainly stands out, is more significant in that area.
Okay, Christy McLaughlin.
So when we talk about differences between county, there's also differences amongst cultures in the county. There's differences among party lines. So it really depends on, which party you're in, what's your interest, who are you culturally? I have Cuban family in the area, but then I know that there's a lot of different cultural Latin families as well. But I'm sorry, maybe I'm stubborn, but I prefer to find the common ground among these districts, especially if I intend to lead. And then we can also find common ground among these very divisive party lines that exist. I think these counties are very notable in how divisive they are amongst party lines in contrast to some other counties in the state of Florida. So with that said, if I can just, respectfully point out amongst my colleagues here, I am the youngest person running in this race. I am a woman, and I have some different energetic qualities that I think would stand out, particularly when it comes to electability in this area. I also consider myself to be a Goldwater Republican, which means socially I can find common ground among left-leaning people, particularly on the issue of LGBT and a variety of other issues, including the environment. We can all agree that we want freedom, and that it can apply to marriage as well. We can all agree we want clean air and clean water. Those are the common grounds that I'm constantly seeking amongst the counties and cultures. And that's why I want to lead, because I use common sense first, and I use innovation and energy to run my campaign, and I will do so if I'm elected to Congress.
Okay, Steve.
First of all, I want to compliment you, Christy, being involved as a young person you are. One of the reasons I'm running is because a lot of people in politics are in it for the wrong reasons. They're in it to get rich. I'm not in it to get rich. Now, answering the question, the infrastructure in Broward County is going through some severe issues. Being a longtime resident, I recognize that we had problems with the sewer and septic systems in Broward County. I don't know that Palm Beach County has the same problem, but Palm Beach County basically has a problem that we've faced already, and that is an exploding population. Consequently, you see the roads in Palm Beach County being worked on to allow people to travel on I-95 and the corridor with less interruption than they would have had we not been forward-thinking enough to get this done. But Palm Beach has a traffic problem, and Broward County is working on what I call a plumbing problem. I hope that answered your question.
All right. Yes, it does. And go ahead, Joe Budd.
I think the significant difference in our district between the two counties, because the Palm Beach County portion of this is Boca Raton, is affordable housing. And the affordable housing issue, I believe, is much more significant in the Broward County portion of this district than it is so in the Palm Beach County portion of this district. And, our front-running opponent on the Democrat side, Jared Moskowitz, he's completely ignoring this issue. He was appointed to the Broward County Housing Council, and they had 3 meetings this year, and he hasn't made a meeting at all, and he's ignoring this crisis while he answers to the millions of dollars of donors, that he's getting into his campaign. And that's the worst type of politician, one who's sucking up to all his donors and ignoring the needs of the people. So in this particular issue, affordable housing is very important, and he's just totally ignoring that problem. It's a significant crisis right now.
What would you do about it in Congress, Joe?
Well, I think there's some public-private partnerships that could be established, which will require some density and zoning issues related to that, where we can address some of those issues. And so Congress can address on a federal level some monies towards a public-private partnership.
I had a question, local and state topic for everybody, and let's see, what order are we in now? We'll go.
It's your call, Randy. Your call. Yeah.
We'll go Steve, Christy, Joe, Jim. How about that? Do you believe that climate change is a threat to Florida? And if so, what, as a member of Congress, would you do to address it? Steve?
Climate change has been around since the inception of Earth. We're going to have climate change regardless of what man does. Relative to what's taking place now, I see nothing more than a shift of income from the developed nations to less developed nations. And I'm not sure that's the process that should be taking place relative to working on what I call equilibrium of the environment. If you have any scientific background, you'll recognize right away that equilibrium always takes place. We've gone through many different climate changes on the earth, and you can go back, if you're as old as me, to when Time magazine was telling us we're approaching the new ice age. The next one that came up, we went through starvation. The next one that came up was overpopulation, and on. The news media hypes up these issues to sell papers and sell, I guess, eyeballs, so that they get the credit that they deserve because of the sensationalism of the stories they create. I'm not sure that the scientific basis that everyone thinks is climate change is really a truism, and people need to investigate that on their own. But I will tell you this, I think we don't need to bankrupt the United States and make our country a third world country where we have brownouts and we don't have water to make the world right. What we need to do is be rational, use common sense, and make sure we do what's right for not just the United States when it comes to climate, but the world. Fossil fuels are not the enemy. Thank you.
Christy?
Okay, so when it comes to the issue of climate change, there is obviously some discourse on whether climate change is a man-made issue due to pollution or if it's a natural phenomenon. But again, like I pointed out before, we can just find common ground. Whether we disagree on the issue of whether climate change is man-made or not, everyone can agree, particularly in the state of Florida, that of course we want clean waters and of course we want clean air. We don't want smoggy air to be breathing in. I have a hybrid car. I got it to save some money on gas, but it also is great for efficiency, less emission, when I'm just driving around town.
Okay, so Christy, do you think it's a threat to Florida?
For climate change, I can't be sure if it's an issue of climate change or pollution. So when it comes to pollution and clean waters, that is always going to be an issue. We are humans. We cause a lot of pollution. And so we do need to protect our waters and our air. And in the federal level, we talked about these infrastructure bills, which I'm against a lot of pork, but you sure as heck are going to see me advocating for the state of Florida to get funding for our clean waters.
Joe?
We've seen some flooding, especially I've been down in the area of Hollywood, Florida, where we've seen some flooding during the moon phases in the fall, typically the harvest moon phases. And so we've seen some issues there, but I 100% agree with what Steve Chess said. Climate change, the word change in that, it changes all the time. And going forward, I've read some scientific studies that project that the sea levels will rise just only 1 inch in the next 70 years. And we're getting near the end of a warming cycle right now. And within the next decade, we might be at the end of it, and it start turning towards a more longer term cooling cycle again. So the climate does change. But to say, for Democrats to say that climate change is the greatest threat to humanity, that's so laughable. What that means is $5 a gallon gas. It's the direct result of $5 a gallon of gas when they want to eliminate the fossil fuel industry. Those are kitchen table items, and Americans aren't going to tolerate that.
Jim?
Yeah, climate change is something that's I think is being advanced as a scam to the most part on the American people, actually on the world population. When you look at all the legislation that they try to advance through Congress, everything is wrapped around these terms of art relating to climate change and for trying to advance policies that have absolutely nothing to do with climate change. And so that prompted me to go back and do some research. I've been going through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration data. That's publicly available. It's up on their system. NOAA is the recognized authority on collecting data worldwide. And an interesting thing that I've seen is that looking at data over the last 100 years, I don't see an indication that of this warming that they're talking about. As a matter of fact, what's happening is the world at this stage of the cycle is becoming more temperate. And as Dr. Chess had mentioned, the world for millions of years goes through consistent climate changes. And so what you're having is less severe winters, meaning fewer severe cold days, but also on the flip side, you have fewer hotter days, meaning days over 100 degrees or days over 90 degrees. And so what's happening is that window between the hottest time and the coldest time is beginning to close up or tighten up. And as you tighten up that window.
Excuse me. I don't know where you're getting this information. This contradicts everything that comes out, annually on this year being hotter and this year being hotter. I don't know which studies are you talking about? You say you're extrapolating NOAA data. I don't know where this is coming from.
Well, let me finish and I'll give you your answer. Okay, and as I was saying, the window is closing up, meaning the Earth is becoming more temperate. Okay, you have a smaller window. As that window begins to close, your average temperature may go up, it may go down. Right now, the average temperature looks like it's going up because of that window closing. But that's altogether different from saying that the world is on a critical path to burn up. Now, the data that's coming from is, I'm sure you've heard of NOAA. Okay, it's readily available. You go to a NOAA site, you can pull down the data. As a matter of fact, in the last 100 years, the hottest period of time that we had was actually 1936. Okay, and if you take a look at that, also the correlations with CO2 variations, it's very revealing when you go through the NOAA data. It's not my data. This is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And if you look closely at the reporting on these studies, they're very, very, very critical about how they phrase their words. They don't say the world is burning up. They don't disclose that it's becoming more temperate. Like I said, okay, they talk about the average temperature. As that window closes, your average temperature could actually drop. Okay, so no, I don't agree. I think there's a serious issue here that's being misused. I certainly believe in things like carbon capture technology. I mean, I'm all for reducing CO2 emissions, but what I don't favor is, unless we have specific data that we can count on, that we should be going off. And the U.S. is a 14% carbon footprint, and China having a 29% carbon footprint. That all of the obligations are imposed on the U.S. while at the same time nothing is happening worldwide. So unless you get an equitable worldwide consensus on things like carbon emission requirements, the U.S. will not only be reduced, to economic ruin, while at the same time other countries will flourish. And so there would be no beneficial results whatsoever on a global basis if you go forward on that type of methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Martin Dyckman, you had your hand up.
That's it. Okay.
Turn your mic on, Martin.
No, I think the issue's been covered.
Okay, all right. Well, let me say this. We've been at this for well over an hour now, and you've been generous with your time, and we appreciate it very much. We may be following up with one or more of you with additional questions. I would encourage those of you who haven't sent a questionnaire in to please do so. We greatly appreciate your time and answering our questions here this morning.